I lost everything but found a new life after hitting rock bottom. I've always been pretty bad at adulting, not in the I forget to water plants kind of way, but in the I make a complete mess of my life and pretend everything's fine kind of way. And honestly, I was good at pretending. Until one Tuesday morning in early September when the illusion finally crumbled and I realized I lost everything. I was 26, living in a mid-sized city somewhere in the US that I'd stopped caring about years ago. My apartment was in one of those cookie cutter buildings with peeling paint in the hallway and neighbors who probably thought I was either a nightmare or just that loud, oblivious guy on the second floor. I worked in finance, or at least I did, until the company finally realized that my spreadsheets were less analytics and more creative interpretation of numbers. Yeah, creative. That's what they called it to it. Before that Tuesday, my life had felt like a constant party. Drinks after work, weekends blurred into blurrier nights of poker and slot machines online, and an endless stream of friends who were basically enablers. But the cracks were there, and I was too busy having fun to notice them. That morning started like every other, except it wasn't. My phone buzzed with an email notification that made my stomach drop before I even opened it. Ryan, please see HR immediately regarding your employment status. I thought maybe it was a joke. It wasn't. I trudged into the office, still half dreaming of last night's victory at the casino, convinced my luck would carry me through the humiliation I knew was coming. My manager, a man named Greg, who had the patience of a saint and the glare of a hawk, met me outside HR. Ryan, have a seat, he said, his tone flat, like he was reciting lines from a manual for firing people who didn't pay attention in high school. I sat, trying to smile like everything was fine. I was a pro at pretending, remember? Your performance has been subpar. There have been mistakes, significant mistakes, and we've had reports of activities outside work that are concerning, he said. My brain clicked. I had no idea what he was talking about, but the way he paused made me uneasy. Activities outside work? I asked. My voice sounded higher than normal, like a scared kid caught stealing cookies. Yes, he said flat. We've received reports that you've been gambling during work hours, using company resources, and Ryan, there are financial discrepancies in your accounts. We can't ignore them. You're terminated, effective immediately. It took me a moment to process. Terminated, fired, out, gone. My stomach sank, and suddenly all the nights I spent thinking I was invincible, the flashing lights, the adrenaline rush, the fake smiles at coworkers, crashed down on me like a ton of bricks. I didn't even have time to pack my things properly. HR escorted me to my apartment, where I grabbed the essentials, my laptop, a few shirts, and a toothbrush. Everything else was irrelevant. I had no idea what I'd do next, but as it turned out, losing my job wasn't the only disaster waiting for me. When I got home, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Emily, my girlfriend of 3 years. I knew the text before I even read it. Ryan, we need to talk. I can't do this anymore. I stared at the words, and for a brief second, a part of me thought she was joking. She wasn't. She'd been putting up with my reckless behavior for years, hoping I'd eventually get my act together. I guess losing my job was the final straw. Ryan, you've changed, her text continued. Or maybe you never cared. Either way, I can't be part of this. That was it. 3 years of late night laughs, road trips, and dreams of a life together. Gone. Just like that. I felt my chest tighten, my throat burn, and the kind of despair that doesn't just hit you physically but roots into your soul. I wandered into my apartment, looking at the empty shelves, the peeling wallpaper, the shadows dancing in the corners. Everything felt heavier. My phone buzzed again. This time it was the landlord. Ryan, your rent is overdue. You have 24 hours to pay or you're out. I sank into the couch, head in my hands, and finally let myself cry. Not a few tears, but the kind that leave your face numb and your mind spinning. Debt, eviction, jobless, alone, broken. Somehow, I had managed to hit rock bottom, and it wasn't pretty. Friends, they weren't calling. People I thought were loyal were busy with their lives, judging me from afar or avoiding me altogether. Family, frustrated, disappointed, or just plain silent. I had no one. And in that silence, the truth screamed at me. I'd done this to myself. Every bad choice, every reckless gamble, every lie. I had dug my own grave, and now I was sitting in it. The tipping point came that night. I went out to one last attempt at distraction. A bar downtown, the kind with neon lights buzzing too bright and music too loud. I needed to feel alive, to pretend like the world hadn't just turned its back on me. I ran into some people I knew, people I thought were my friends. They laughed, congratulated me on living the life, and I realized they had no idea how close I was to hitting the absolute bottom. I was the punchline, the guy everyone shook their head at and whispered about behind closed doors. And then it happened. The gambling debt I'd ignored for months caught up with me in the worst way possible. I'd borrowed money I couldn't repay, and the person who came looking for me wasn't polite. I'll spare the exact details, but let's just say it involved a very angry man, a threatening tone, and me realizing that the small lies I told myself weren't just harmless. They were lethal. I ran. Out of the bar, into the streets, heart pounding, mind racing, and for the first time in years, I felt that old adrenaline, the thrill, but not because I was winning. This was fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. I made it back to my apartment, locked the door, and sat in the dark. The walls, the silence, the emptiness, it was all mine now. I had nowhere to go. nothing to turn to, and no one to call. I felt like a ghost in my own life. The night dragged on, and I kept thinking about the choices that led me here. Every reckless decision, every ignored warning, every cheap thrill, it all piled on me until it crushed the man I used to think I was. By the time the sun started to rise, I was still sitting there, staring at the empty apartment, the last of my belongings packed, feeling like I had literally nothing left. And in that moment, I realized the truth. This was it. My life, the one I'd been living, was over. Completely, irreversibly done. I had hit rock bottom. And the scariest part, I had no idea how to get back up. I never realized just how hollow life could feel until you actually lose everything. I'm not talking about losing your keys or missing a rent payment. I'm talking about losing the ground beneath your feet, the people you trusted, and the life you thought you had planned. At 26, I had reached a point where the only constant was uncertainty. And yet, somehow, life continued. Or maybe it just forced me to keep moving because standing still would have killed me. After the apartment, the girlfriend, and the job were gone, I didn't have much left. A backpack with a few shirts, an old laptop, and a credit card maxed out to its limits. That was it. My first few nights were spent wandering the city, sleeping on benches in parks that smelled like wet leaves and desperation. I learned fast that the cold concrete isn't the kind of comfort anyone wants, and that the city lights, so bright and dazzling when you're partying, feel cruelly indifferent when you're alone and broke. I tried couch surfing at first. A friend I hadn't talked to in months let me crash on their sofa for a couple of nights. But soon, I realized I was more of a burden than a guest. There's only so much a person can do for someone who's spiraling, and I was spinning faster than anyone could keep up with. Eventually, I ended up on my own again. Back in the streets, back to facing myself, and let me tell you, I didn't like who I saw. The first few days were a blur of shame and hunger. I would wake up under a bridge or in a sketchy alley, stomach growling, clothes damp, and wonder how I had managed to ruin my life so completely. Flashbacks would hit me at the worst times. Nights spent at poker tables, lies I'd told coworkers, the fights with Emily I should have ended differently, the small betrayals to friends I barely noticed. I realized slowly, painfully, that I had built my own cage and now I was stuck inside it. But life has this strange way of nudging you toward a crack of light, even when you feel like the darkness has swallowed you whole. Mine came in the form of a man named Harold. I first met him outside a 24-hour diner I had wandered into, trying to warm my hands on a cup of coffee I couldn't really afford. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, dressed in a faded army jacket, and had this calm presence that made people notice without trying. He watched me for a while, not in a judgmental way, but like someone seeing the map of my pain etched across my face. "You look like hell, kid," he said casually, sliding into the booth across from me. I flinched at first. Who talks to a stranger like that? "I could say the same about you," I muttered, staring at my hands. He chuckled, not mockingly, but in a way that made me feel a little less invisible. "Name's Harold. You lost, huh?" I didn't answer immediately. How do you explain losing everything without sounding like a sob story? But something in his tone didn't make me want to lie. "Yeah, everything," I said finally, voice cracking. He nodded like he understood. "I've been there. In my own way, life has a way of putting you in a gutter sometimes. Not forever, but long enough to teach you a lesson." Over the next few days, Harold became an unlikely mentor. He didn't hand me money, didn't lecture me, didn't make me feel pathetic. He just talked, gave me small bits of advice, and nudged me toward doing tiny things that mattered, like grabbing a shower at the local shelter, volunteering a few hours at a soup kitchen, or applying for odd jobs even if they were humiliating. It was humiliating, yes, but it was also grounding. I started picking up small jobs, washing dishes, delivering groceries, stacking shelves. Nothing glamorous, nothing that paid well, but it reminded me that I could contribute, that I could start building something again. Each day, I felt my shame in the pit of my stomach, and each night, I lay in my borrowed bed, feeling a little less crushed by it. Therapy was the hardest part. Sitting in a chair across from someone, explaining every wrong choice, every failed relationship, every gambling streak. I wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. But Dr. Patel, she was patient. She didn't judge me. She made me see that my life wasn't just chaos, it was a story with consequences, and I had the power to write the next chapter differently. Slowly, painfully, I began to accept responsibility. Flashbacks would hit randomly, like unwelcome guests. I'd see Emily's face as she walked out, hear the laughter of friends I had burned bridges with, feel the rush of gambling wins that had cost me so much. But instead of sinking back into self-pity, I started writing about them, journaling my failures, naming them so they lost some of their power over me. It hurt, but it worked. One afternoon, while volunteering at a local community center, I met Jessica. She was organizing a small program for young adults, teaching basic computer skills and resume building. She noticed me fumbling with the old laptop they'd lent me. "You're Ryan, right?" she asked. I froze, unsure why she knew my name. Yeah, I muttered. "You've been helping out here a lot. I like your work ethic," she said, smiling warmly. For some reason, that simple acknowledgement made something inside me stir. I realized I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen, not for my failures, but for trying. And that's when the real shift started. Small victories. I stopped hiding. I applied for more permanent work. even if it was cleaning offices or stocking shelves, and I didn't care that it was a far cry from finance. I began to understand that rebuilding wasn't glamorous. It wasn't exciting. It was quiet, slow, and deeply personal. By the end of that month, I had a tiny routine. Wake up, volunteer, work a small shift, eat simple meals, sleep in a friend's spare room or on a borrowed couch. I was still broke. I was still haunted by my past, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward instead of spiraling. Then came the unexpected call. Harold had mentioned a friend who owned a small business outside the city. A quieter place, slower pace, a chance to start fresh. I was skeptical at first, convinced I was still trapped by my mistakes, convinced I'd fail again. But he insisted. Kid, sometimes the only way out is to leave the mess behind and build something new. You're ready for it. Don't let fear stop you now, Harold said as he handed me a card with the contact details. I stared at it, the ink smudged slightly, feeling a strange mixture of hope and terror. Could I really do it? Could I risk leaving the only city I'd ever known, with nothing but my backpack and a few dollars, to try and rebuild somewhere else? For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of excitement, a tiny flame in the darkness. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was a spark I needed to find a life that wasn't just survival, but something worth living. I didn't know what awaited me beyond the city limits. I didn't know if I would fail or if I would finally succeed, but I knew one thing. I had a choice. I could stay stuck in the rubble of my mistakes, or I could take the chance and step forward into the unknown. And as I packed my bag that night, preparing to leave everything familiar behind, I realized that for the first time since hitting rock bottom, I felt alive. Leaving the city felt like stepping into a dream I wasn't sure I deserved. I had my backpack, Harold's recommendation, and the faintest flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could build a life that didn't revolve around mistakes. The town wasn't far. Small, quiet, nestled somewhere in the suburbs of a larger city. Streets lined with trees, houses with neat lawns, and people who smiled at strangers like it was normal. I'd forgotten people could be that kind without an agenda. The first day I arrived, I felt like an imposter. Every step on the clean pavement reminded me that I didn't belong here. But Harold's words echoed in my head. Sometimes, the only way out is to leave the mess behind and build something new. So I did. I walked into a diner called Maple Maine, where a help wanted sign hung crookedly in the window, and I applied for a job washing dishes. Nothing glamorous, nothing that screamed future millionaire, but it was honest, and it was mine. The first week was brutal. I'd forgotten how physically exhausting honest labor could be. My arms ached from lifting pots I didn't realize were heavy. My feet throbbed from hours on tile floors, and my hands were raw from scrubbing dishes until my skin peeled. But there was something grounding about it. Something that made me feel alive in a way the city's chaos never did. I was building again, one plate at a time. The town moved slower than the city, but that was a blessing. I met people who didn't know me as the guy who lost everything. They saw a guy working hard, learning fast, and slowly, grudgingly, I started to see myself the same way. There was Carla, the diner's owner, who had this knack for spotting potential. She taught me the ropes with patience, often tossing in advice about life between orders. "Life's like a dishwasher, Ryan," she said one afternoon, hands on her hips, smiling at my fumbled attempt to stack plates. "You can complain about the mess, or you can learn to make it shine." I started small, waking up early, making sure I was on time, doing my best at work, and even helping out in ways nobody expected. But old habits die hard. I found myself itching for the thrill of the city nights, tempted to check online gambling sites, or scroll through social media where I'd see pictures of friends partying while I scrubbed floors for minimum wage. Each time I fought the urge. Slowly, painfully, I learned that the discipline wasn't punishment, it was freedom. Evenings became my time to explore. I ran in the local park, pushed myself physically, and discovered a love for running I hadn't felt since high school. I began volunteering at the library, helping teenagers with homework and tutoring a couple of kids in math. The more I gave, the more I realized that redemption wasn't just about surviving, it was about contributing, being useful in a way that mattered. And then there were the people. Slow as it was, the town had a rhythm that made friendships grow naturally. I met Tom, a mechanic with a crooked smile and a love for old motorcycles, who somehow became my confidant. There was Rachel, a barista at the local cafe who could read me like a book and never judge. Even Harold stayed in touch via phone, offering advice and cheering on every small victory. These people didn't know my past, but they helped me shape my future. Money was still tight. My savings from the city had dwindled to almost nothing, and each month was a balancing act. Rent, food, bills. I lived with precision, budgeting down to the last dollar. But for the first time, financial stability felt like a tool, not a trap. I was learning patience, the value of planning, and the satisfaction of slowly watching my efforts pay off. One night, a moment hit me that I'll never forget. I had finally saved enough to buy a secondhand laptop, a proper one, not the battered thing I carried from the city. I set it on my small desk in my tiny rented room and sat down. staring at it. The thought that overwhelmed me wasn't that I had something new, it was that I had earned it. My own hands, my own work, my own discipline had brought me here. And for the first time in years, I felt proud. Not of luck, not of charm, not of pretending, but proud of me. Of course, the past didn't completely disappear. I thought about Emily often. Her laugh, her eyes, the way she used to shake her head when I did something stupid. I wondered if she had moved on, if the city had swallowed her up like it had swallowed me. Sometimes I'd catch myself scrolling through social media, a flicker of longing in my chest. But then I'd remind myself why I left, why I needed this life to be mine, untainted by mistakes I could never take back. Sports became a bigger part of my life too. I joined a small basketball league, just for fun, just to feel the rush of competition without the pressure of winning money or proving anything to anyone. I found joy in the game itself, in the teamwork, in the simple satisfaction of pushing my body and letting go of the anxieties that had haunted me for years. It was a small thing, but it reminded me that happiness didn't have to come from chaos. And then, one afternoon, the first real test came. I was walking home from work when I saw him, someone from my past, not Harold, not anyone I had met in this town. It was someone I hadn't expected, Jason, my old roommate from the city. He looked different, older maybe, but with the same sharp grin that had once charmed me into bad bets and late night adventures. "Ryan," he said, eyes wide, not quite believing, "is that you?" Oh, I froze. Part of me wanted to run, hide, pretend he didn't exist, but another part, maybe the part that had been building slowly for months, stood tall. I nodded. "Yeah, it's me." He laughed, but it wasn't mocking. "Wow, you look different. Good different." "Thanks," I muttered, unsure what else to say. Jason explained that he just moved to a nearby town, had heard about me through mutual friends. He asked if we could catch up. I felt a flicker of anxiety. The past was never far behind, was it? It could always find you, show up at the most inconvenient time, and remind you of who you were, not who you were trying to be. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the choice I had to make. Do I open the door to my past and risk falling back into old habits, or do I continue building cautiously, one step at a time, trusting that this new life could be real? The thought of slipping back scared me more than anything, but the idea of growth, of redemption, of finally claiming a life that was mine to live, it scared me too, but in a different way. And that's when it hit me. Rebuilding wasn't just about doing the right things. It was about being brave enough to face the past, to face the present, and to keep moving forward even when fear clawed at my chest. I didn't have all the answers yet. I didn't know if I'd ever fully outrun my mistakes, but I knew this. Every small victory, every honest day of work, every moment of patience and integrity was slowly constructing a version of me I was beginning to respect. I closed my eyes, listening to the hum of the small town at night, the distant bark of a dog, the faint sound of a car driving by, the peaceful silence that was completely mine. I had survived the fall. I had survived the darkness. And now, for the first time in my life, I felt like I could thrive. The rebuild wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time, I believed it was possible. I thought I had finally figured it out. I had a routine, a job I could manage, friends who cared, and a sense of self-respect I hadn't felt in years. I believed that rebuilding was enough, that the city, the mistakes, the chaos were all behind me. But life, as it turns out, has a funny way of testing whether you've truly learned from the fall. It started innocuously. A letter slid under my apartment door one morning. Simple envelope, no return address. I opened it and froze. The contents were clear. The debt collectors hadn't forgotten me. Months ago, in my reckless city days, I had borrowed more money than I could possibly repay, promising myself I'd deal with it later. Well, later had arrived, and the message was unambiguous. Pay or face consequences. Threatening consequences. I sat on my bed, heart racing. For a second, I felt the familiar rush of panic, the one I had known back in the city when everything seemed insurmountable. But this time, something was different. I wasn't the same Ryan. I had learned, grown, rebuilt. I didn't respond with fear, I responded with strategy. I called the collector, negotiated a manageable repayment plan, and explained my circumstances honestly. I didn't lie, I didn't make excuses, I took responsibility. It was harder than I thought. There was shame in admitting I had failed before, in exposing my past to someone who didn't care about my growth. But as I hung up the phone, I realized something profound. Accountability doesn't diminish you, it empowers you. For the first time, I felt that real freedom wasn't escaping consequences. It was facing them. Not long after, my family resurfaced in the most predictable way possible. A call from my sister, the same one who had always considered me the screw-up of the family. She wanted to know if I could help out with some financial advice. Her tone was polite but patronizing, the kind that reminded me why I had distanced myself from them in the first place. I paused, took a deep breath, and made a choice. I wouldn't react defensively. I would be honest but firm. I told her I was still rebuilding, that I was focusing on my own responsibilities, and that while I cared, I couldn't step back into old patterns. She argued. I listened. I stayed calm. And for the first time, She actually heard me. There was a pause, then acknowledgement. Not forgiveness, not praise, just recognition that I had grown, that I wasn't the same person she had dismissed years ago. Even as I navigated these challenges, temptation lurked. I walked past the same online poker sites I used to spend hours on, saw the ads flashing in bright colors, promising quick money and instant gratification. My fingers itched to click. I felt the old pull, the whisper of, "You can win just this once." I stopped, inhaled, and reminded myself I already lost everything once. I wouldn't let the thrill of a few dollars erase months of hard work, of small victories, of dignity. Work was no longer just a job. It was a proving ground. Carla, the diner owner, offered me a promotion to assistant manager. I hesitated. It meant more responsibility, longer hours, and a chance to make mistakes that would affect others. But I took it, and in every shift, I tried to embody the lessons I had learned. Patience, honesty, integrity. I treated every customer, every coworker, every problem as an opportunity to prove that I could handle more than just survival. I could thrive. Then came Jessica, the volunteer coordinator who had unknowingly helped shape my second chance. She asked if I could lead a small workshop for young adults about career readiness and resilience. At first, I laughed nervously. Me? Leading? But then I remembered the countless times someone had given me a chance when I had nothing. I accepted, and the experience changed me. Sharing my story, my failures, and my small victories allowed me to see how far I had come. For the first time, I realized that my pain had a purpose beyond me. And then the final, unanticipated test of all my progress arrived. The past itself. Emily. Out of nowhere, she reached out, casual at first, asking how I was doing. Part of me wanted to run, to pretend she didn't exist, to bury myself in the life I had built, but I didn't. I agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe, nerves knotting my stomach. Sitting across from her, I saw the familiar warmth in her eyes, but also caution. I had hurt her deeply before, and she remembered it. But she also wanted to see if I had changed. And I had. I spoke honestly about the mistakes, the gambling, the pride, the despair, and, importantly, about the journey I had taken to rebuild my life. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't beg for reconciliation. I simply told the truth. She listened, really listened. And in that moment, I realized that redemption wasn't about proving something to the world or to anyone else. It was about proving it to yourself. It was about looking at your own reflection and recognizing that, yes, you fell, yes, you failed, but you also stood back up and refused to stay down. By the time the conversation ended, we weren't back together, but we were at peace. That was enough. I had repaired a piece of my life that had haunted me, and I had done it on my own terms. Weeks later, the small victories accumulated. I paid off the last of my city debts. I earned respect at work, not just from Carla, but from the team I now managed. I volunteered regularly, mentoring kids and young adults, sharing the story of a man who fell hard and clawed his way back. The town that had seemed strange and intimidating at first now felt like home. One evening, sitting on the porch of my small rental house, I watched the sun set behind the trees, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. I thought about the Ryan who had wandered the city streets, broken, hopeless, scared, and angry. I thought about the Ryan who had sat in empty apartments, staring at walls, wondering how to survive. And I realized something. Hitting rock bottom hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning. The darkness hadn't destroyed me. It had forced me to build, to grow, to learn, and to confront myself in ways I never imagined. Every scrape, every failure, every moment of despair had led me here, to a life that wasn't perfect, but was real and mine. I felt peace, deep and steady, the kind that comes not from forgetting the past, but from embracing it. I felt confidence, not the reckless, arrogant kind I had in the city, but the quiet certainty that comes from knowing you can handle whatever life throws at you. And I felt empowered because I knew now that no matter what happened, I had the tools, the resilience, and the heart to face it and thrive. Redemption, I realized, wasn't a gift. It was earned. It wasn't about erasing mistakes. It was about transforming them into lessons, into growth, into life. And as I watched the last streaks of sunlight fade, I whispered to myself, finally and fully, I'm alive. I'm here. I'm enough. And for the first time in my life, I truly believed it. All right, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100K subscribers by the end of this year. And we love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.